You're listening to Boobies and Newbies, brought to you by the Frolic Podcast Network. Welcome to Boobies and Newbies, the podcast that asks novice romance readers to think outside the dick in a box and brave the unbridled world of erotica. I'm your host, Kelly Reynolds, and it is time for another episode in our September Hot for Hollywood series. My guest today is no stranger to romance novels. In fact, you might remember her as a not-so-newbie guest from our Getting Schooled book club episode. She's the blogger behind What to Read Next, and of course, host of the What to Read Next podcast. I'm also thankful to call her a patron of Boobies and Newbies. Please join me in welcoming Laura.
Hi, Kelly. I'm so excited to be here.
Hello, welcome back. Always glad to see you, hear you, read along with you.
Yes, I love chatting with you about romance, and I am so excited to chat about this book. There's so much to digest and to just...
So much to talk about. I have to tell, I usually don't get into the book like right away, but I will tell everybody that Laura's DM messages while reading, did I just say DM messages? Yeah. M stands for messages. I'm an idiot. That's like saying direct messages. But Laura's DMs while reading this book were so funny because the mention, it was kind of like take a shot every time you read the word horse. Because this is a certified horse book. This is a horse girl book if I've ever read one.
Yes. This is a book that if you read Black Beauty growing up and always wanted a pony and loved My Little Pony, and you're like, oh my gosh, I wish there was a romance to talk about horses. I wish there was a romance about horses and just love and more horses and all this different horse material. This romance is just for you.
It's flicka, but with a little bit of fellatio. It's all the things combined. Actually, now that I mention it, there isn't any.
No,
there isn't any fellatio, so that's a little disappointing. But I will say you're absolutely right. It is one of those books because I feel like whenever I think about horses in romance novels, I immediately go to Western, which then makes me think of cowboys, and usually, at least in my experience, it's been like the male hero who is the one, riding the horses and feeding the horses and all that jazz. And I don't usually get to see the heroine, the female character in a romance novel, be the one who's just as accustomed to that world, if not more so. So this being the exception, and it takes place in California, no less, which is, as somebody from California, I always forget that there's people with ranches, because that's just definitely not a part of my California experience. So yeah, all sorts of awakenings in this book.
Yes, and and I'm telling you, it's not just horses or cowboy ranches or just riding. There's rehab horses, there's dressage horses, which I was watching Olympus at the same time, and I was like, oh, it's like that episode from Kevin Hart and Snoop Dogg talking about the horse dancing.
Yes!
So there was all these different small horse mentions, and there's also the horse sperm had a conception. That's the first.
Oh my god, yeah. The very first page is them setting up the breeding. And I was just like, wait a second. I'm so confused what's going on here, because let me tell you, I never thought I would read on the first page of a romance novel horse sperm. I'm not even kidding. There is so much horse sperm and mention of fluffers but for horses within the first 3 pages of this book that I had no idea what I was in store for.
Yes. I was like, what am I reading? What kind of research did she do? What kind of information did she gather?
So I guess we should preface this episode too by saying that neither Laura and I identify as horse girls. And if people are listening wondering what the fuck is a horse girl? Believe me, that means you're probably not a horse girl too. So if you are a horse girl, you know it. You grew up with the toy horses and going to horseback riding lessons and, again, watching Spirit or like Flicka maybe like 1 too many times or like 50 too many times. And so if you don't know what we're talking about, you're probably not a horse girl either. But I will say, I think you can enjoy this book regardless of whether or not you're a horse girl.
Just take a shot every time you read horse.
You will be schmammered by the end of chapter 1.
Yes. And then it just keeps going and going.
It's so true. Well, before we get into the book, which, obviously we could not, we had to just kick off the conversation with horse sperm. Like, we couldn't wait. But Laura, tell everybody about what to read next.
So What to Read Next is a book recommendation show. So I interview authors, book influencers, readers, and talk about what their books they should read next. So there's a diversity of genres. There's from thrillers, romance, to some audiobooks. And the whole point is to destroy your TBR. So you hopefully by the end of the show, you'll have 1 or 2 books to buy or to borrow from your library. And then just add them to your queue.
It's a lot of fun, and you have a blog that goes along with it. So if somebody is like maybe less of a podcast listener, although if you are, I don't know what you're doing here, and like you just want to like read recommendations, like you can do that as well. It's all on her website, so a little bit for everybody.
Yep. So I try to do recommendations like based on like taste or tropes or specific things. Like I have like some MM romance, I got some H gap, I got some like basically if I read a book and every time I think I read a book, I'm like, how do I categorize this? And who would be the ideal reader? And because when I was growing up, I was a big reader, but there was like always a questions like, what should I read next? Like, I don't know what I'm going to read next. And so it happened in 2016 where I discovered BookTube that I was like, oh my gosh, someone's telling me what I should read next. Like someone's giving recommendations. And I was like, well, there's no podcast about this. Like, why don't I just start a show where I just talk about books and like, here's what you should read next, So that's the whole point. It's like just to figure out what to add to your queue. Because there's a lot of books out there. So helping you kind of like identify like if I like this genre, then I can try this author. If I read all these authors backlist, then I can try this. If I have a book slump,
right?
Or if I need audiobooks, like which narrators are really great. Like there's multiple ways of reading, so trying to give you a little bit of taste of everything so you can have a fun escape.
All of which are valid forms of reading. I also want to just point out, because if anybody is telling you that like reading a book is more important than listening to an audiobook, that is absolutely false. Yeah. However you are consuming the literature you are consuming is completely valid.
Yep. Consuming the story. That's the whole point. So
yeah, exactly. I'm curious, and maybe this is something to think about and answer later in the episode, but I want to know, if you were to read the book we're talking about today, Nobody Else But You, what you would recommend somebody read next? Like, what is the next horse girl book to follow up Nobody Else But You? And I want you to just let that simmer for a little bit, and we will come back to that, because I don't want an immediate response. I want you to really ponder this one for a little bit.
Yeah. I need to think about this, because I'm like, okay, it's Hollywood, it's this, and
yeah,
but there's horses, and the horses is like, I this is the most amount of horses I've ever read. So I'm not a big fan of. I'm a fan of cowboys, but I'm not like a huge cowboy diehard. Like, I need to read next cowboy. I read some of them. I read Carly Moons, but it's like you're probably not gonna find me looking for the next horseback. But
yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. But I'm
with you. I like a good like cowboy romance from like time to time. It's definitely not something that I like go out of my way to read, but sometimes when one like crosses my path on Instagram or NetGalley or something, or somebody else is recommending one, I'm like, ooh.
Yeah.
Or I remember when Rebecca Weatherspoon was writing her Western series, which is featuring, characters of color on the Western frontier. I'm like, well, of course I'm going to read that. Like, because that's something I don't get to read every day.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I think that may be the similarity. That may be the one. The Cowboys of California.
Really?
Yeah. It's in California.
Right,
it's cowboys. It's Hollywood. The second book.
It's also Hollywood.
The second book is Hollywood. It's an Oscar-winning gift bag gone missing, Yes. I think that's the book,
That You're right. I didn't even think about putting that together. And then I remembered that there is a Hollywood storyline in that as well. And that one is that the one, is it something
I
Cinderella?
think it's Cinderella. Yes, it's the one that just she took the way she got his gift bag, I think it is. The story. And then he went to look for her. And he's like, "You got my
Yes.
gift bag."
Yeah, and it's a series of 3
Brother.
Cinderella inspired. I know If the Boot Fits is one of them, but I think that's the first one.
Yeah. Yeah, if the boot fits, it's Sweet Sleeping Beauty. So Cinderella, and then something else is the third one.
The first book
A
is A
Cowboy
Cowboy
to
to
Remember. Yep.
Remember. Yeah, and that one's like a Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah.
And then I think If the Boot Fits is the Cinderella one,
Yep.
and is that the one?
That's the one.
Yeah, that's the Hollywood one.
That's the Hollywood one. That's the brother who's a Hollywood actor or director or something.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
and they meet at like an Oscar party.
Yep.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, so there you go. Cowboys and Hollywood all in one, which, I mean, again, hot for Hollywood. That's our theme this month. So perfect. It works. I love it.
And both are set in California. So
And both are set in California. Wow. So there you go. We've just found an entire other series that is also like California cowboys who have a tie to Hollywood.
Yeah.
So between Rebecca Weatherspoon and Claire Marti, everyone's TBR list is already stacked.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Well, where can everybody find and follow you and listen to episodes of What to Read Next?
So they can go to my blog, whattoreadnextblog.com, or they can go to Spotify or iTunes, wherever you listen to your podcast. Just look for What to Read Next, and then you should pop up.
And we've already sort of alluded to it a few times now, starting with horse sperm at the beginning of this episode. But today's book that Laura and I will be discussing is Nobody Else But You by Claire Marti. And this contemporary enemies to lovers romance was published in September 2019. It's available on Amazon for $4.99 Kindle edition, and it is also the first book in the Pacific Vista Ranch series. So along with going and reading, Rebecca Weatherspoon's series, you can also read the rest of the Pacific Vista Ranch series, which I have not indulged in yet, but I am going to take a wild guess and say that it follows the rest of the sisters introduced in this series, which I love a good family saga. I love reading about one brother and then the next brother, or in this case, sisters. I am here for it. So that works for me. And then I will say Claire and I actually connected via social media a while back, and I've read and reviewed a few of her arcs since then. So I knew it was only kind of a matter of time until I discussed one of her books for the podcast. So I'm excited that I finally found the right time, the right book. And it just so happens to also be the first book in a series. So I think this is a great intro to Claire's books for both newbie romance readers and also newbie readers to Claire Marti. So great place to start. But let me go ahead and give everybody a synopsis for Nobody Else But You, and then we will dive into our chat. Again, it's not called the Horse Girl book, just for reference, although that is how we might refer to it throughout the episode. And we do so lovingly, just so people know. It is a very, very fond nickname that we've given this book. All right, here we go. A smoking hot stuntman, a fiery horse breeder, and a 220-acre ranch, too small for both of them. I'm going to pause right there because a 220-acre ranch, too small for 2 people. Oh my gosh. I got to say, you find out very early on in this book that the Hollywood production that's coming to film at the ranch wants about 50 acres to film, and they make it sound like nothing. Oh, we just want to use 50 acres or so. I'm like, 50 acres? You don't, I have a friend who has a backyard that is half of an acre, and it is the biggest backyard I've ever seen in my life. So, this city-ish girl, I'm more of a suburb kind of gal. I cannot comprehend a 220-acre ranch.
But it's too small. Too small for that.
It's too small. It's too small for 2 people to deal with each other. Keep that in mind moving forward. She's avoided Hollywood for years. When an arrogant Hollywood stuntman struts into Samantha McNeill's breeding barn, sparks fly. She doesn't care how mouth-wateringly gorgeous he is. Not when he assumes Pacific Vista Ranch's resident horse breeding manager must be a man. Not to mention his job threatens to pull her family back into the paparazzi-filled world they escaped from over a decade ago. Now it's at her door, wearing faded jeans and a wicked grin. Holt Ericsson. Oh my gosh, the amount of like masculinity packed into those two names, let me tell you. I've found, and I know Holt is not Colt, but like when I kept thinking like Colt like a gun, but also Colt like a horse, and then his name is Holt. I don't know. It was very close. It was very close. Holt Ericsson can tell the beautiful redhead hates him on sight, and the feeling is becoming mutual. But he will call in a favor and convince Sam's legendary director father that Pacific Vista Ranch is the only suitable place left in California to film an epic Western. Holt's invested all his savings in the movie, and his entire career is riding on it. No way will he allow one irritating, sexy woman to stand in his way. Sam intends to fight him at every turn if only her heart didn't race when they're together. Holt does his best to steer clear of her, except all he wants to do is hold her close. The sizzling attraction between them is either going to burn up the sheets or burn down the ranch. Actually, spoiler alert, it almost does both. Initial impressions and overall thoughts on our horse girl of a book right here.
So it was interesting. I read like half of it on one sitting on an Uber ride, and so like.
Love it. I can't read in the car. Kudos to you.
I can. I ended up going, it was my birthday, and I ended up going to sell my books at half price books in the suburbs. And so I took an Uber, and the Uber got in an accident. So I was like, well, I'm just going to sit here. So I read I spent 3 hours in the Uber waiting to get home. So,
oh my God.
So I read I would say 70% of the book in one sitting, and it was quite engaging. And I used to read a book a day. That no longer is the case, and now I'm taking a few days, a few weeks. It depends. And so it was quite engaging up to 70%. And I remember saying to you, I think you came out and can we record it a few weeks later? I was like, okay, I think I got my horse quota for the month. I'll wait till September and finish my horse quota and finish the book.
My horse quota. It's so true, though. I mean, and you know what? You're right in that. I don't know what it is exactly, but it took me a while to get into this book. And I don't know if that has anything to do with the book itself, or it was more of just sort of my reading mood and what I was interested in reading. I was coming off of just having read Real by Kennedy Ryan and The Charm Offensive by Alison Cochrane, and they had set really high expectations and also these really emotional storylines that I also enjoyed. I'm not usually an emotional reader, and those were books that I really loved, and I guess I just needed a good cry while reading. And so I think I was kind of looking for that in whatever I was reading next. And when I wasn't getting it, I was like, oh, well, I'm not really into this right now. So I took a little break. And then I came back to this book, and then I flew through it. So I think it was definitely me just needing a little break in between the two. But I will say, it seems like a longer book when you're looking at how many pages there are to read. And then when you start reading it, it goes by very quickly. Yeah. So that was something that I did enjoy, that it always felt like it was moving forward. I did really like most of the characters most of the time. If that makes sense. Because I found myself identifying with Sam, the heroine, a lot. Not in terms of being a horse girl, because we've already agreed that is not Laura or myself. But she's a go-getter. She just always kind of wants to know the answers to everything. She likes to keep her emotions inside and not cry in front of people, or except when she gets angry. When she gets angry, like, y'all better look out because she will unleash the fury on people. That was sort of the part of her that I did not identify with. I was like, ooh, girl, take a step back. Have a conversation. Like, this is getting aggressive real quickly. Other than that, I really liked her. And then with Holt, he was kind of a perfect sorted dude. Like, he was a really good guy. Like, he was out here making money for his family. He, you know, I mean, he was interested in like maintaining the privacy of Sam and her family while they were filming this movie. Like, he never really hit any red flags for me. Like, I thought he was pretty much like hashtag book boyfriend goals, like, as I was reading it.
Yeah, like, there was, like, no toxic. He was like, yeah, he's an alpha man because he's a stuntman, but he's not, like, an alpha hole. Like, he was just, like, okay, you know, and, like, their breakup scene, they were, like, he calmed down, and then came back. Like, it was, like, no, like, this, like, crazy stuff where it's, like, I'm never gonna talk to you ever again, blah, blah, blah. He's, like, all right, take a step back. Come back, come breathe.
Reevaluated. Yeah, and Sam did too, but I don't think as to like the same extent that he did. Like, she definitely, but at the same time, she had the emotional baggage of like what they were going through with like the paparazzi, because the whole storyline, which I did find interesting, because I think this is something that I haven't seen explored as much in romance, but it is something that we've seen explored a lot in like recent documentaries and docuseries, anything that's like behind the scenes with like celebrities, where they talk about the effect of the paparazzi and like the emotional and mental trauma that can cause for so many people. And that was something that had happened in the past for Sam and her family. Her dad was a top-notch film director, and unfortunately her mom had an accident and died on set of a movie, and the entire family was basically hounded by the paparazzi for a long time, and they made their escape. They founded this ranch, and that's become their life for the last decade. So on the one hand, when the director and Holt come a-calling and they're like, hey, we want to film something here, and the family like flips out on them, like, how dare you like even ask something like this? I was like, okay, I get that they've been traumatized and like, you know, but at the same time I was like, they're not asking you to be like right here. Like, I mean, I don't know. Like, part of me was like, come on. Like, but at the same time, I kept having to check myself, like, okay, but you can't put a timeline on somebody's baggage or trauma. Like, you can't tell them to like get over something like by a certain amount of time. Like, even if it's been a decade, it seems like whatever, not only her mother's death or, you know, her dad's wife's death, like, as traumatizing as that is, like, then there was the whole aftermath of being followed and hounded by the paparazzis. And that's like adding an entire extra layer of trauma. So I'm like, okay, I have to buy into this. Like, I just kept telling myself, like, I have to buy into like the amount of terrible, you know, memories that they have caused by not only a death, but like everything that happened after the death, in order to like believe the setup for this. Because if you don't, if you're like, come on, what are you doing? It's fine. Like, then it'll be hard to like keep going with the rest of the book.
Yeah, I think you have to understand the trauma that they went through and the expectation, and then be like, okay, like, Hollywood's coming back to our house. Like, it's coming back. Yeah. They're going to go and they're going to dig in our story, and they're going to do the internet's forever. And it's like, okay, like, you kind of be like, but you're not asking you to be in the movie. And then they got asked to be in the movie. So it's like,
yeah, that was like a whole extra thing. Because then it's not only can we film here, it's, hey, do you want to direct part of the movie again? Hey, Sam, do you want to ride a horse in the movie? I was like, what is this guy's damage? Like, I don't understand why this man thinks it's okay. And just to be clear, this is not Holt, the hero that's doing the request. It's the director of the film. And, but I thought that was weird. I kept thinking, and this was something that kind of, I think it bothered me in because it made me think something else was going to happen, was the amount of times that they would mention that like her mom's accident was like nobody's fault. Like, oh, it was just an accident. It was nobody's fault. Like, nobody's to blame. And the fact that this director kept making all these requests from them, and the dad would be like, well, I owe him. I owe him. I kept thinking like this was going to somehow tie back into like a murder mystery plot, like having to do with her mother's death. And I think it's because, and this is something I've mentioned on the podcast before, is something that kind of irks me, is when there's a lot of repetition of something. Like if somebody is telling the same story to 3 different characters, or if we are hearing as the reader the same excuse that like her mother's death was an accident multiple times, I'm like, well, the more you say this, the more I believe it is not an accident. So I think I was set up to believe that there was something else happening, something a little hinky. But did you have that feeling at all while reading it?
I was expecting some freak accident to happen in the movie. Like, I was not expecting other stuff. And I was like, it's just gonna repeat itself. There's gonna be a freak accident. Like, I was like, there were other things that happened in the movie, and there were like reasons why things were crazy. But I'm like, are they gonna die? Is the horse gonna die? Like, what's gonna happen? You know?
Oh yeah. I thought like maybe Holt would have an accident, and then like it would be Sam like worried like, oh my God, I can't lose another person like to another accident in Hollywood. Like, and she could have, like, Claire Marti could have done that. But the paparazzi thing is set up from the very beginning as being like an issue. So I was like, okay, well this could go like a few different ways. Like this could either be that like the main tension point is going to be there are paparazzi involved. It's going to be that Holt gets hurt. It could be that she thinks that he's betrayed her and like sold something to the paparazzi. Like I was like, it could go like one of like 30 ways. And so I have no complaints over how it did unfold. I kept expecting, like, here are the other things that were repeated that I made note of that I thought were like, I'm like, well, why are we repeating this? Like, Holt kept telling everybody about like his mom and sister and how they live in Colorado. I was like, okay, well, we already know this. Like, we don't need to learn this like 3 times. And then the other one was they kept making a big deal about Sam being like the baby of the family, like that she was so young and she's his youngest daughter. And even when Holt is trying to defend himself, saying like, I'm not interested in her. Like, she's like a little sister. She's a kid. And I'm just like, how old is Sam? Like, is she like supposed to be like 19? Like, what? I never, and maybe it was mentioned and I glossed over it, but Holt is only 30. So I was like, I don't understand how much younger she's supposed. Oh no, actually, I did make note of it that later on they say that she was 15 years old when they left LA, and they say that it was about a decade ago. So I'm like, she's 25.
Well, in order to be breeding manager and be the top breeding manager, I assume she's like in her late 20s, Like, you need to have experience taking on horse sperm to be this top breeding manager.
You don't just walk into handling horse sperm. Like, that's like 3 layers up the horse breeding ladder.
Yeah, I assume she was like 27, 28, 29, like,
okay.
Like, that's the assumption. I don't think her age was mentioned, but yeah, I was wondering what happened to the mom and sister. Did he end up doing? Because I was like, he kept mentioning the mom and sister, the mom and sister, the mom and sister. I'm like, what if they don't want to move? What if they're having Denver and they're like, we don't want to move to California, like,
Yeah, that's never really addressed either. It just seems like it's already in the works because his mom had cancer and like he wants her to move to like a warmer climate. Is like they are moving to California. I'm like, oh, okay.
Happened like 15 years ago. Like, it was a while ago. It wasn't like 5 years ago. It was like a while ago because it was when he lived in Denver. He's 30, right. So it's like 15 years, and yeah.
Because he like went to night school to finish high school and then moved to LA, and they say he moved there when he was like 18 or 19. So I'm like, his mom hasn't, and to be fair, we don't know if like she's been in remission or like if she's had other bouts with cancer, along the way, but it did seem weird that it's like this whole thing about how she had cancer like over a decade ago, and he's like at the point where now he wants to move them to California, but at the same time, I'm like, okay, well, maybe that's just a means of money. Like, he didn't have the money. They don't have the money. They can't make the move. Like, okay. And she said that they owned the house in Colorado. So, like, that one didn't bother me as much. But I'm with you. There were some things where there was just, like, such a gap in the time that I was like, I'm confused. Like, why are we treating her like a child when she's, like, a 27-year-old woman, and, like, everybody's calling her the kid, the baby, like, you know, I don't know. It was, and it would be repeated, like, just like how his family lives in Colorado, and how, you know, it would be things where I'm like, okay, we get it. Like, it's just something that from personal reading experience, I've recognized to be something that irks me as a reader. Like, I don't really care about, like, I don't look for grammar flaws. I don't look for, like, editing or spelling issues like some people are so eager to point out on Goodreads. Like, for me, it's when something stands out to me and then it happens again and then it happens again that I'm like, oh, okay. So like, when we're hearing the same information repeated to 3 different characters, I'm like, this is something that to me you could have said once, and then maybe the next couple times it's just he told them about his parents. You know, we don't have to actually, like, hear or read the same conversation.
Well, I think it's just like about writing a story. Like, is there a purpose behind saying the same thing 3 times? Is it like foreshadowing something?
And that's how I interpret it.
No, I'm like connecting the dots. I'm like, what am I trying to connect here? Like, what exactly is the author trying to tell me that you don't want to tell me? You know what I mean?
And exactly, like, you mentioned foreshadowing, because, like, that's what, when I read that the mom had an accident and it was nobody's fault, when I read that multiple times, I was like, this seems like somebody, and it's coming from the same character, this seems like somebody who is trying to gaslight and heavily convince everybody that this was an accident and it was nobody's fault. And at the same time, the man whose wife was killed owes this man something. Like, I don't know. I kept thinking that the director was going to turn out to be a much more skeezy character. And there was going to be, like, something really nefarious, like, going on behind the scenes. But what's interesting too is that this book, like, I was getting to maybe like 90% of the way into the book when things kept happening.
Yes!
Like, I'm like, isn't this the time where we should be, like, wrapping up, falling in love, like, making plans for a future together? And no, the ranch was set on fire.
Yes! Yes!
I was like, wait a second. What?
I was just like questioning myself, like, did Kelly give me a non-HEA book? Like,
right. Didn't it feel like it was going to have, like, it was going to be like a duet? Like, this was going to, like, carry and so my question, and obviously we haven't read the next book in the series, but my question is, I wonder if, like, the next book picks up, like, right where this one left off, like, when the fires happen, because that was the other thing, is they said they didn't know what caused the fire. Like, it literally happens about 15 pages before the end, and I'm like, okay, did somebody set a fire? Like, we get no resolution with the fire. Maybe a gender
reveal happened and somebody set some fireworks on fire.
Funny, but not funny. But no, you're right. We don't really get a resolution, because then it goes straight from them getting all the horses out and, like, nobody's harmed, you know, that's good, to him declaring his love for her and then getting down on one knee and proposing, which, let me tell you, I was really into this book, like, start to finish, until that man got down on one knee. And then that was like when I leave my review for this, I really did enjoy this, like, majority of the book. Like, I was very invested, and, you know, there was never a point where I got bored, like, while reading, because, like I said, it just kept moving forward. There was always something happening. But the minute he gets down on one knee, like, that just took a star off the book for me. And it's probably because I just hate, I don't know what it is. It's, I hate emotions. Like, I hate feelings. Like,
But I think
think it was just too much.
I think it's just so cliche. It's like, oh, I'm going to propose. This is happily ever after. We're going to be together forever. I'm like, I'm fine with the happy for now. I'm happy that they're just like getting to know each other. Like, there's no need to propose. There's no need to get married. There's no need to have kids or any of the stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I'm all for child free, not married, just get a dog if anything. That's like most emotion you can have,
Yeah.
endings. There's no need to just have a proposal and get down on one knee, have a bachelor proposal, and do it. Blah, blah,
Right.
blah.
And you know what? I'm actually okay with like a proposal usually in the epilogue. Like
Yeah.
when they've been together for a little bit more time, like I just have a really tough time with it's not even like an insta love story either. I think that's what it is like when I read an insta love story, I'm told from the get-go like this is a story about two people who are like instantly attracted. We're going with like the love at first sight angle. And so I kind of in my heart know when I'm going in to read an insta love story that like this will probably end with them getting engaged or getting pregnant or whatever it is within the span of like a few days or a week. Like, and you know what? I'm okay with that because I can buy into the insta love fantasy.
But that's fine. No.
However, this one is not. This is an enemies to lovers, and it is actually like a legit enemies to lovers. Like, I mean, I think a lot of people complain about when enemies to lovers aren't so much enemies. And in this case, it's not like they're like mafia. Like, nobody's trying to like kill each other. But she has a huge vendetta against Hollywood and anybody associated with it. So I'm like, okay, there's a lot of tension here. And so for us to have that start and them only be in each other's company for like the span of I don't know if it's even specified, but maybe a week, maybe it's longer and I just didn't realize time was passing, but it felt short to me. And to end with a proposal just seemed a little too much for me. Like it didn't feel like that was necessary and or earned.
Yeah, I think the proposal should have happened in book 3. You know what I mean? Like, wait a couple years, wait a couple times, like, wait a couple months, like, and because even the transition of enemies to lovers was, like, so sudden. It was like, we hate each other, and it was like, oh, we're kissing. And it was like,
and a little bit of, like, hate sex / kissing, which I am all for, and then, like, the agreement to, like, kind of, like, keep their sexual relationship, like, quiet. Like, I love when people are sneaking around. I love it. I think my main complaint about that is that we don't get to see them together enough. Like there's so much going on at this ranch, not only with the filming, but also with all the members of the family dealing with these memories being dredged up, that I don't know if we actually get to see that much time with Sam and Holt falling in love. And so because of that, that's what bothered me about the proposal at the end. Like, this isn't to say that I don't think a proposal can work in a romance novel. I think it absolutely can. It's one of those things where it's like, I need to see them fall in love to be able to root for them to get engaged at the end. Like, this is one where if I had my way, it would end with him asking her on a first date, because they never even get to do that. Like, they get to have sex, they get to make out, and I'm like, yes, they are falling for each other. I want him to be like, you know what? When this is all over, we're going to go on our first real date. Like, that would have been my ending.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes. We're getting out of the ranch and we're going on a date. And I've been watching too much Love Island, so I'm like, going on a date.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where it's just like, I love that. I love reading stories about love. I love reading stories about people falling in love, and sometimes those people get married, sometimes they have babies, sometimes they don't. But I don't want that to be like the one narrative, is like, we fall in love and by the end of this book we will be engaged, and by the epilogue we will be married and or have a baby. And like, that's fine as a narrative, but some books it just doesn't work for. Like, some stories it doesn't fit the mold, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
I think it's like there's nothing wrong to say like I don't want to get married. I want to be in a relationship, but I don't want to get married. Like, you know, that's like my narrative. I don't want to have kids. Like, I would like to be in a relationship, but I'm like not. I'm happily like not having to sign a paper, you know, and have a big
Yeah.
wedding and have all these different things. It was like that's like my biggest nightmare. So I'm not gonna have it.
Well, and or even just not right now. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't have to happen right now,
Yeah.
you know? And so, and I mean, I know it sounds like we're like ragging on this book because of it, but it's more of just like a catalyst for this discussion, because this is clearly not the only book that has a proposal at the end, nor is it the only book that I've read where there's been a proposal at the end and I've been like, what? You just started kissing. Like, how did we get here? That it happens a lot. It happens a lot more than I personally would care to experience. That being said, I do think I do really enjoy the sexy moments in this book. I think there's more than one, which is wonderful. Like I feel like lately I've been reading a lot of romance novels where we get like one steamy scene and it's like 300 pages into the book. So I will say, thankfully, we get more in this one.
Yeah, we do. We do.
But before we get to the steamy sexcerps, Laura, what is there anything else for you that you really enjoyed about this book?
I like this book overall. Like, it was like a fun series. It was a fun scape. It was a different take on Hollywood. Like, I kept asking, I was like, oh, it's just a movie being filmed. Like, it was not Hollywood. It's just like a different take on Hollywood, and just sticking up like a hero who is a stuntman, not, you know, and there's Hollywood horses, which are different from the road horses.
They brought their own horses.
so it was fun. So I really enjoyed it.
I did love that he was a stuntman. Like, that was the reason I chose this book over so many other romance. Because, I mean, let's be honest, there is no shortage of romance novels set in the world of Hollywood, whether it's in Hollywood itself or elsewhere. You know, we've got actors, actresses, models, directors. Like, I mean, there are so many to choose from. But let me tell you, I saw the word stuntman in the synopsis and I was like, oh, I haven't read a Hollywood stuntman before. And I guess part of me wanted to see more of the movie itself, but that's probably because also I'm just like a hoe for Hollywood. Like I just love anything related to like film and the industry. And so I would have liked to have kind of seen more of like the movie they were shooting. But again, I'm just really interested to see what comes after this book, because we're introduced to her two sisters. She has Sam's twin sister, Dylan, who's like the quote unquote like pretty one.
Yes.
And Sam is more of like the tomboy, which again, I loved about her. I was like, I love this. And I love that he's so interested in her specifically, even though she has a twin. Like, that is something that I really love in romances, is when there's a character that has a twin and like the person that falls in love with them can tell them apart, and like he's attracted to one of them specifically. Like, I think that's a cool way to like show somebody's like interest in like a particular person. And then she has her older sister. Is it Amanda?
Yes, Amanda, the veterinarian.
Yes. Yeah. And then Dylan is the one who's like less affiliated with the horses. She's an artist.
Yeah, she's a friend. She left us. She was like, God. She's like, this is too much.
I gotta get out of here. I gotta jet off to Paris.
and kept telling Sam, come to Paris. And so I was like, no, I must not go.
So, I mean, I haven't looked ahead to see what the other books entail in this series. So I'm kind of like, does it pick up after the fire? Are they still filming the movie? Does Dylan hook herself someone in Paris and bring him home? Yeah. Like, you know, I'm really curious to see what else will be involved and like for all the other romances in this series. Yeah. And then the other thing is that the Sam's dad, the film director who's remarried this lovely woman named Angela, she has like all these kids too. Like they're very much living like the Brady Bunch lifestyle where it's like their parents got married and they each had like 3 or 4 kids. And so I'm wondering if there's books for them, like for the boys. I don't know. I don't have answers. I did not do my research, but it's something that, having read this one, I'm interested enough to know more about these people and like just sort of like what other stories they have. And it takes place in California, like on a ranch. I'm just like, I could definitely be swayed to read more of these books.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
I will say, I did think it was funny that her sister is an artist, and then she has like this hidden ballet talent, which this was, by the way, the second book I've read this month where the main character was a ballerina and like was destined to be like a prima ballerina, but then like something happened and they had to quit ballet. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like look, all of these ballerinas like that are, you know, keeping up with their art, but they didn't become famous. And I love the scene where Holt goes to do ballet. And that was probably one of my favorite scenes in the entire book because he is a stuntman, and he specifically asked Angela, like, hey, is there like a ballet studio around? Like, and I, you know, like I keep in shape. Like, this is like one of the things I do to like stay limber and everything. And he mentions that like athletes do it, which is very true because my dad, who played football back in like the 70s, they would go to ballet, you know, practice or rehearsal then. So, I mean, this is nothing new. I just love that mention of it, and the fact that it could have, like, she has a little chuckle at it, but at the same time respects the fact that he does it and that she thinks he looks real sexy while doing it at the ballet studio. I was like, yes, I want more men dancing.
Yes. I like to see, like, I take ballet bar classes, like, typically I used to, before the pandemic, I used to take them in the studio, and it was great when there was, like, a man joining us. He was like, oh, there's a guy here. Like, oh my god.
Yeah.
You know, we're all suffering in the same torture of just doing plies and second position, you know? So, it's great.
I love it.
But I love Angel's matchmaking. So, like, oh yes, there's a ballet studio. You should go to this class because I know Sam's gonna be there.
Yep, exactly. So I liked that a lot. That was one of my favorite scenes was the ballet scene. And then he also has like this hidden guitar talent where I was just like, why is it that everybody in this book has like this extra talent where they're like, you could have been a professional ballet dancer. You could have been a professional guitar player. Like, it just is really funny that everybody had all of these extracurriculars going on outside of what they did for work. But honestly, I like that because it's like, that's human. Like one of the things, Laura and I were talking about this before we started recording, but we've both been watching the new season of The Circle, which anybody who listens to this podcast is probably sick of me mentioning The Circle, but I love it so much. And there's a new season out, and one of the things that's like a red flag for somebody this season is they're like, wait a second, this guy says in his profile that he used to play professional soccer or basketball, whatever sport it was. And then he's also trying to be a fireman. And then he also is like a musician. Like that's like so many things. Like that sounds so fake. And I'm just like, we are living in the age of the hustler.
Yeah,
like this
the millennials. First of all,
I don't know anybody who does like one thing.
Well, it's not just that. Like, you gotta monetize. Like, that's the whole point. Yes. You gotta monetize your hobby. Like, there's no such thing as a fun hobby. To like, no, you gotta like do gigs. You gotta do this. You gotta do that. Like, it's like the millennial. Like, it's a millennial side hustle. Like, you're expected to have a side hustle. Like, it's not. Like, it's not a question. I thought it was a New York thing, but then I heard someone was like, no, it's a millennial thing. Like,
yeah, because I always, and it's a very specific like subset of millennials too. Like, I think it's the younger half of millennials for the most part, just because I feel like I talk to so many people who are like, you know, have what we would consider traditional like 9-to-5 job, Monday through Friday. And I'm just like, oh, okay. So then like, what do you do? What do you do after that? Like, what are you doing at night? What are you doing on the weekends? And then they'll be like, what do you mean, what am I doing? I'm like eating dinner. I'm going to bed. I'm watching Netflix, and I'm like, no, I get that, but like, what else do you do? Like, what are the other thing? And it's not that I'm trying to like pressure people to think that they need to do more, because that is not what I want. It's just that I am personally somebody who does not like to be bored. Like and this is part of it, is I know ingrained in me just from the society we live in that I do feel some sense of guilt if I'm not doing something.
Yep.
And that's something that I need to work on. I know that. I recognize that within myself, but at the same time, I like being busy. I like doing something, whether it's something for the podcast, or I'm reading a book, which is again for the podcast, or taking a writing class or something. It's just like when I don't have something on my schedule, I feel like something's wrong.
Well, I think for me, what it's interesting, it's like evolved. Like I used to have a blog, I used to take fitness classes, I used to review them, and then I took reading, and I was like, oh, I gotta review them, I gotta do this, I gotta do that. And it's like, when I talk to non-readers, like non-people who are in the book world, they're like, I just read a book because I saw it Reese posted. And I was like, you don't understand. Like, I heard this book, like, and it's like so immersed, but I'm taking this like from a place of like what would have been a normal hobby of just like, I just read a book because I saw it on Amazon and it was fine. Now I'm like, no, I need to figure out how it fits, like what if it's problematic, if it's not problematic, like
I have to make graphics. I have to put it on 3 different platforms. I
gotta put it on a different platform. I gotta think about like how you present it, how I push it.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, and then I hear from the books, and then I get obligated because I get some free books, and somehow I'm an influencer, and I did not sign up for this.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Part of it is very toxic. Like, and I acknowledge that. Like, part of it is very toxic that we have this thought process of like all the things I must do, or that I'm like obligated to do, or I owe this to somebody. Like, this is the conversation we hear come up a lot when talking about like reviewers being given ARC copies of a book, reading it, and then like maybe posting something that's not like a positive review, and then getting hounded about it by the author or the publisher, or somebody from the author's team. Like we see this happen all the time. And I think it's because we have like this deep sense of obligation to do more. We have to do more. We have to show what we're doing, because this is what social media has done to us. Is I love social media in so many ways. It gives us opportunities to connect. I would not know Laura without, things like Instagram. But it also brings this level of toxicity where we do compare ourselves to other people, we compare our podcasts, our books, our review, like any of it to others. And it's something I think women do, especially, myself included. It's probably if somebody were to ask me like, what's one of like your number one flaws, because they always ask you that at like a job interview, which is just so messed up. Like, what are you bad at? One of the things is that I want it to always be perfect. Like, I want it to be perfect. I want it to look good. I want it to sound good. Not just for other people's standards, but for my own. And it's something that over time, and as I've gotten older, I'm willing to like relinquish some control over, because also I recognize that perfection is
fine,
It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And the question then becomes like, well, what do we define as perfect? Like, who gets to define what is perfect? So we're just going to, toss that expectation right out the window. And really, just to bring it back to the book, I know I've gone on a little bit of a tangent here, but the whole concept that prompted this was just that minor thing of including that all of the characters had like a little something extra that they like to do. Like, I mean, even for Sam's dad, who was a director for years, left the business and then opened this ranch, he admits to his, grown adult children that he's been missing it. Like, he's been missing the thrill of being on a set and seeing other people and creating art. And what's interesting is that like everybody in her family, with the exception of Amanda, who I feel like we don't know a lot about yet, she's the veterinarian, that they all have an artistic side. Like, her sister's a painter. She does ballet. The dad's a film director. The mom was an actress, I think from
so,
what we know about her death. I think she was an actress. And so I'm like, I like that. I like that Claire Marti is showing that people can be very nuanced and have different interests in completely different things. You can be a doctor and also like this. You can be a horse breeding expert and hang out with horse sperm all day and also dance ballet.
Yes.
So anyway, long tangent, but that's where I was going with it.
Yeah. I agree.
Well, do you have a favorite sexcerpt amongst the few?
So I hate to bring it to you, but I skipped the sex scenes.
That's right. You know what? I forgot that we had talked about this before. Can you tell everybody, like, what is it about them that, like, is it just that it's too cringy? Like, you're not interested in it?
I'm not interested. It's just like my own stuff. Like, I realize I'm like in the spectrum of, not a spectrum, but I'm like, I don't like, it's not a big deal, but it's like, it doesn't do it for me. I'm just kind of like, okay, it's repetitive. It goes by to the pro. Yeah, it's like, I skim through them and I'm like, all right, I got the gist. Like, what I look for is, did it move forward the relationship? Like, did it got an investment? But if there's not, it's just like just the technicality. I'm like, okay, just it doesn't do anything for me. So,
did you think that these particular scenes moved it forward?
I think it did.
I think it did too.
I think what happened, because I hate it so much, like it just built a relationship from like hate to love. Like it moved the love part. So, but yeah,
I agree. And this is something I talked about in a recent episode, although with my recording schedule, I'm not even sure if this is one that I've released yet. I think this is in our Charm Offensive episode, but we talked about sort of like how we miss the whole idea of like kissing and like the simpler parts before sex. Like I think of them before sex, at least, as like a precursor. And but like kissing just as kissing, like not kissing to lead to something else.
Yeah.
And so I liked that this book had a few different scenes. Like the first scene, we get like a steamy makeout session, like by the pool. And then we get a different scene where they actually do have sex, like in his like little cabin that he's staying in, which is not little by any means. No, it's like a full-sized house.
It has multiple rooms, like 8 rooms or something like that.
And then I think there's another sex scene later on, like closer to the end of the book. So, well, let me share a couple things with you then, Laura, because one of them I marked because I was like, ooh, this is really hot. I like this. And then the other scene I marked because it probably has one of the funniest last sentences I've ever read in a book before. I don't think it's meant to be funny, but I found it hysterical. So, again, it might just be me and my sick ass sense of humor, but I'm going to read a piece from I think this is the kissing scene. I think this is when they're like making out by the pool. So I'll go from where he growled, because that's always a great place to start. He growled deep in his throat, swept her up in his arms, and carried her over the threshold of the guest house. Oh no, I lied. This is like when they're going to have sex. Their lips remained fused together. He kicked the door shut behind him, and when he released her legs, she slid down the length of his body, every single rock-hard inch. He dragged his hands down from her shoulders to her hips, trailing liquid fire everywhere he touched. He cupped her bottom in his hands and lifted her up and placed her on the kitchen island counter. Yes, love it. I love anything that's like not in a bed. Love it. He stepped in between her legs and yanked her in close, never breaking their kiss. She wound her legs around his waist and raked her hands through his messy, sexy hair. Her center liquefied, and she wiggled to create some friction where they were joined together. And I really loved all the descriptions in there. I think sometimes when you read specific romance writers, you're like, this writer has like a knack for like character descriptions, but like the sex scenes are like, eh. or, you know, vice versa. I think Claire Marti actually has some really fantastic descriptions in the sex scenes. So if you do enjoy reading sex scenes, I would recommend them. So I have to read you the end of this chapter. And this is the same one that I just read an excerpt from. This is the end of when, this is the end of when they are having sex. So he released one hand and reached to the point where they were joined together, stroked and caressed. Another climax built and blazed through her, and she fell forward, desperate to feel his lips against hers. The moment her mouth met his, she exploded and rocked against him. Man, that's like 3 orgasms in like one paragraph.
He's handing it out like candy. He's like, choo.
You get an orgasm. You get an orgasm. Sam. He groaned her name and grasped her hips once again, holding her in place. He stroked 2, 3, 4 more times and whispered her name again as he climaxed. There's another one. He pulled her down. Oh, here we go. He pulled her down and wrapped his arms around her, keeping her pinned on top of him. She collapsed on him and couldn't move. Here it comes. He kissed her hair, and then she was asleep.
It's all the orgasms. That's all of them.
She collapsed on him and couldn't move. He kissed her hair, and then she was asleep. Like, I think I died laughing while reading that. And again, I don't think it's meant to be funny, but just the fact that, like, I've read so many romance novels at this point in my life, and I read so many of them where it's like, he basically like makes her orgasm so many times that she passes out, which great, I'm here for. I don't think I have ever read it phrased as, and then she was asleep.
Her kiss. Like, he gave her a forehead kiss. You know what I mean? Like, not even like her lips. Like,
just like, and that was it. She was asleep. Like, not like she dozed off or like he could hear like a soft snore. Just like, nope, she was asleep. That's it. And I just thought it was so funny the way that it was phrased. Like, I don't know what about that had me going so hard, but I laughed for like a genuine minute, like before I continued reading.
I fell asleep.
And then she was asleep. So there you go. So that's about all I've got for this book. Overall, I will say I did really enjoy this book. I do think I will look into the next books in the series. It's interesting because like Dylan, I don't know if I would be interested in her romance depending on who she falls in love with, because she seems like she's very romantic. She seems like she's got like stars in her eyes, like very interested in like love at first sight, happily ever after, and I don't know if that's for me. And then Amanda, I might like more because she's like the no nonsense taking like factual
science girl, STEMs girl.
Yeah. I would take the STEM girl over the horse girl. Yeah. But that being said, I did like this horse girl because she was also very sassy and tomboy-ish, and I love that. Yeah. What about you? Do you think you'll read more books in this series?
I think so. It depends. Like, I need to. I've been starting a lot of books, so it's hard for me to be like, am I gonna finish it? So I think so. I think I like series. I like getting to know the family, getting to know the whole, getting to know how the progression of the couples happen. So yeah, maybe someday.
Yeah. Probably, maybe, kind of, sort of, someday, tomorrow.
Yeah.
I don't, it's, who knows? But yeah, I'm with you. I wonder how much, how much of a role Hollywood will play in future books in this series. And I don't know. I haven't looked into them, but I am interested. And I would love to see Angela's sons make an appearance at some point. Like, if they do have their own books. Like, and it just seems like a great potential for a spin-off series. Like, if that's not what this was written 2 years ago. Maybe she's already done that and I just don't know.
Yeah. It's like a whole big series. They were like, oh my gosh, it's like 7 books in the series.
Like, oh, that's right. But yeah, so let's give this book a few ratings. And I know you've done this before, but we are going to be rating for heart, humor, and heat.
Okay.
on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the very best that it can possibly be for you at least. And these, ratings are completely subjective and mean absolutely nothing. So let's start with heart. What do you think?
I would say I would give it an 8. It has a lot of heart. There's a lot of family. There's a lot of tenderness. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of heat. That comes with heart.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's so much about family in this book. And for me, any book that has family as the primary or secondary storyline is going to be super high on the heart. So for me, I might even do a 9. I don't know. I might do. See, here's the thing. I would give a 10 for the family, but for the actual love story, I would probably give a 6.
Yep.
Because it does feel a little, let's get married at the end, a little too quick for me. So maybe it would balance out to a 7 or an 8 for me.
There we go.
Humor, I don't know if I would even necessarily.
Well, she fell asleep.
It's not supposed to be funny. You know what? It's not that I would say that it's funny. I don't think I would give it a not applicable rating though, because I do think there still are moments beginning on the very first page when we talk about having fluffers for horses. So I guess my humor rating would still be a number, but it would probably be fairly low. I don't think it's meant to be funny, but there's a few cute moments. What do you think?
This is not a rom-com. This is just a romance.
No.
Contemporary romance. I would say a 3 or 4.
I was thinking 4. Yeah, I was thinking below the average of ha-ha moments. Yeah. But again, I'm not necessarily looking for that when we're talking about a family that's still traumatized by a death of a family member 10 years before.
Yep.
So there you go. Heat, on the other hand, this is probably difficult, I feel for you to grade, though, for Heat. Because
it has multiple sex scenes. So that's multiple places where I skip over. So it is high heat. It is it's not NC-17 because I consider that when there's anal and there's all the other stuff. So this is R-rated, high heat. I would say 8 just because there's multiple sex scenes,
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'm with you. Nobody's getting tied up. No. Nobody's, taking it up the ass. I love all those things. Don't get me wrong. But, I feel I would probably give it a 7 because there's definitely multiple scenes. They're explicit scenes. I mean, we don't have any of those fade to blacks, which I cannot stand. So yeah, I think I'd give it a 7. Fair. I mean, it really does touch on a lot of things. If you're not looking for necessarily a funny read, you happen to love Hollywood, you happen to love horses, and you also want some steam with a lot of family drama, boom, this is the book for you.
Yep, I agree.
Now that you've had some time to think on it, I know we made our recommendation for Rebecca Weatherspoon's series. Do you have any other horse girl books that you want to recommend?
I think because it's top of mind, I would say Make It Sweet might be another one. It's a Hollywood actress who gets fired from her job, and she's trying to avoid the paparazzi. So she goes to this estate, and then the hero cooks her French pastries, and it's just so good. But it's they don't like each other. So,
but there's no horses, right? This is more of a Hollywood. This is a Hollywood. Okay.
It's a Game of Thrones. Imagine if you're a Game of Thrones, whatever main character, Emilia Clarke's character, and she gets killed off, and then she's she needs to escape the paparazzis because they're not supposed to know her. That's I would say Make It Sweet by Kristen Callahan might be another
Make It
one.
Sweet has also been on my to be read list for a while now because I almost picked it as one of our foodie romances back in March or April, and it was Yummy Love, that's what it was. And the only reason I didn't pick it was because there were more. So it kind of worked out perfectly though, because we will be reading a Kristen Callahan book at the end of this month for our book club pick. So Dear Enemy, that's something we'll be discussing live on Instagram. And Make It Sweet, I think, are they part of the same series?
They're part of the same universe. They both are Amazon books, and they both are Kindle Unlimited. So if you have the program, just download the book. I think you did listen, so they also have the audiobook available, so you can actually have access to both for free.
And a man who cooks, Give me
Yes.
some of that.
Yes. I'm all about the man who feeds me. You know, feed me.
Yes. Literally all I'm looking for in life. That is literally like the top things on my list are food and food.
Yeah.
I mean, really, like, and it's just, I mean, and if somebody can bring me food and perhaps feed my like book addiction and then also want to test out like weird sex things I read in romance,
Yeah.
that's all I need.
Yes, that's pretty much. It's a very specific Call of Duty universe. Watch it make it happen.
Yeah, this is us manifesting
Yes.
my man into existence
Yes.
right here.
That's kind of fun.
As always, it is a pleasure having you here, and I'm sure we'll hear you back on Boobies and Newbies sometime soon. But in the meantime, people can go check out what to read next, both the podcast and the blog. And thanks, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thanks so much for listening. Boobies and Newbies is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Find more podcasts you'll love at frolic.media/podcasts. You can follow Boobies and Newbies on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Boobies Podcast.